Welcome to Ask MSVIA, where we answer your most common insurance questions clearly, quickly, and without the jargon. Let's get into today's topic.
Hello, and welcome to the MSVIA podcast. Today, we're joined by a client and Sean Liverman to talk about tail coverage. So, what is tail coverage? Can you define that for me and why it's important?
Yeah, so tail coverage is very important. Its official term is the extended reporting endorsement. And it's kind of cool to know that name for it because it helps you to really kind of understand what it does. It allows you to continue to report incidents or claims that might have happened during the policy period. Really, what it allows a provider to report claims after a claims-made policy has ended. Think of it as a way to protect yourself from allegations that surface after you've left a job, retired, or switched carriers, but are related to the care that you provided during that time or you provided in the past.
Okay, so for example, if I was with a previous insurance carrier and came over to MSVIA, but I had somebody claim something when I was by the previous carrier, tail would cover that? Is that what you're saying?
If you purchased the extended reporting endorsement when you left that previous policy, yes.
Okay, so do you purchase that through your current carrier or your new carrier?
Define current or new, right?
So if I left my carrier, do I purchase it from MSVIA or the carrier I left?
You purchase it from the carrier you would have left before you joined the new policy with us.
Okay, that makes sense. So do I need tail coverage every time I switch carriers? Should I always purchase that with my carriers?
Well, not always, because, your new carrier could offer to pick up what's called nose coverage, meaning that you would roll over your prior acts into your new policy, or you could tail out the old carrier. It really depends on what your particular needs are.
Okay, and would you all help us decide if we need that, or how would you guys kind of guide the purchasing of that to make sure we don't purchase something we don't need?
Well, it's important to make sure that you don't wind up with a gap, really, right?
Right.
So whether you're choosing to pick it up under your new policy or whether you're choosing to pick up or to purchase a tail when you leave the old policy, it's an analysis we can help with.
Okay.
But anytime you end a claims-made policy, the key thing is to make sure that you're making some provision for picking up those prior acts and either moving them to your new policy or purchasing a tail that picks up your old exposure.
Okay.
There may be situations with your employer, where you need to start with a new policy and they don't want to have you roll over your prior acts. So in that case, you would have to actually purchase the tail for your prior acts from the old carrier. We see it's really needed anytime a claims-made policy ends. If you don't get nose coverage or prior acts under the new policy that you're picking up. We see it, when somebody leaves a group or they switch carriers or dissolve a practice. So.
Okay. And can you tell us what does it cover? So when someone purchases that, it's covering what for them?
Yeah, it really applies to events that occurred during the original policy period while the policy was active, but are reported after the period has ended.
Okay.
Right. So you carry that policy. When you start a claims-made policy, you start with an effective date, and you also start with what's called a retroactive date. As long as you maintain that claims-made policy in force and you renew it year over year, as long as you're still paying for it and it's active, then it's providing coverage. The difference with the claims-made policy versus other types of policies, when you cancel the policy, it stops providing coverage for that whole period of time. Basically, it goes whoop and goes right back to the beginning, and you don't have any coverage for that period of time.
Okay.
Unless you purchase extended reporting endorsement or tail, or unless you pick up prior acts coverage with your new carrier.
Okay. So can you talk a little bit about, let's say that I'm a carrier or a practitioner and I decide not to pay for tail coverage, okay? And then I cancel and I'm moving on to another. And then I do have a claim that falls under that old policy. What kind of cost considerations would we be looking at? And how does that kind of harm, our practices?
Yeah, there's a lot of questions. Let's unpack that, right? So let's say you had a 3-year period where you had that prior policy and you decided not to either secure prior acts or purchase a tail for that period of time. And then you have a claim. So there's two different questions there. First of all, if you have that gap in coverage where you didn't secure any coverage for that period of time, then you're personally exposed for whatever liability issues come up from that period of time.
Okay.
Because you don't have any coverage, right? So, the potential cost there if a claim comes in is right now it's a Virginia cap limit. So you're looking at $2.65 million.
Yep.
And, if there's more than one, then whatever that aggregate amount could be. So, yeah, it's a huge, huge exposure. And the other problem with that is if you leave yourself with a gap of that nature, you're going to have a really hard time securing prior acts coverage or securing coverage with a new carrier at all.
Oh, interesting.
So when we do see that, because they don't want to write a new policy for you, even if it's a brand new policy, because there's that moral exposure. Morale exposure, I always get those two, but there's that exposure there that, if a claim came through, you very well may have a hard time getting prior coverage in that scenario. So,
oh, that's interesting. I don't think people realize that about tail coverage, that it could hurt you in some ways, like just getting coverage, which is similar to a lot of insurances, right? Like if I have a horrible driving record, there's going to be insurance companies who may not want me. And it's a similar concept here. That's interesting. So then who pays for this type of coverage? For the practitioner? Is it the practice? Is it the individual?
It really depends on the provider's contract with his employer.
Okay.
Or if you're not employed and you're a solo, or not solo necessarily, but an independent provider, you're most likely going to have to pay for it. But I mean, in the employment contract, you could see the provider being responsible for purchasing when he leaves the employment, or it could be part of what's negotiated in the contract that the employer would actually cover that cost. As part of their agreement. One other thing to keep in mind as far as costs are concerned, there are some situations where tail is actually free. It's a provision that's built into most of our policies that if you retire, if you die, or if you're totally disabled, then the tail is given at no cost.
Oh, wow.
There are some requirements on the retirement, free tail for retirement. And we're happy to go over those with the client and make sure that, you understand what those are. That's one of those things you really want to get your head around, if you hold one of these claims-made policies. So.
Okay. So if your employer paid for certain parts of it but didn't have tail coverage, you could add tail coverage on yourself? Does that make sense? Like
typically, so the tail is usually purchased when you cancel the policy.
Okay, when you cancel the policy.
Right?
Okay.
So it would be something that's negotiated in the contract ahead of time.
Okay.
But the payment is usually made when the provider cancels the policy and leaves.
Okay. That makes more sense.
Yeah.
Okay. And then can you just kind of talk about planning ahead and just some quick tips and ideas that you have for that?
Yeah, I mean, you want to make sure you review your contract, with your employment contracts before you sign, and you really get specific on the malpractice coverage responsibilities, who's going to pay for what in that. If you're leaving a claims-made policy and you're going to a new policy, always ask whether or not that new policy is picking up prior acts, or make sure you're clear on what you would want to do in that scenario. I would really get to know the retirement provisions of your existing policy if you have one currently. Look and make sure that you understand. Is it a 1-year requirement that you're with the company? Do you have to have a certain amount of time in practice? That sort of thing before you retire. And then if you expect that you're going to have to purchase a tail, start budgeting for it early.
Okay.
So, if you're retiring or planning to leave a group in a couple of years, and make sure that, you're putting money away for that, because it can be a significant cost, but it's one of those things that you want to make sure that you have. It seems like a detail until it's not.
Right.
Right. And when it's not, you want to have that plan in place. So.
And so can you, as a provider, figure out from your carrier, like what a tail coverage would cost ahead of time, or how can you kind of make sure you're financially prepared for that?
Most of our carriers don't really give you an idea ahead of time. Well, they won't tell you exactly how much it will be. They may say, 150 to maybe 300% of your expiring premium.
Okay.
And that really differs by carrier, how they approach that. Really, only one of our carriers will tell you up front.
Right. Okay. And I guess it could change, right? If you've got 2 years until, they don't want to make a promise they can't keep.
Right. Well, I mean, most of our carriers look at what their rates and their filings every year. So it could change as a result of a new filing and rating structure, that sort of thing. So.
Okay. So if I'm looking to retire, how far back do I need to be with a carrier in order to get that free tail coverage?
Yeah, like we mentioned, I think that really varies depending on the carrier. Actually, it does really vary depending on the carrier. Most of our carriers now have gone to a 1-year requirement, so you only have to be with them for 1 year. Basically, you renew your policy, the first time, and then after that, after 1 year, they'll consider that free retirement tail. Some carriers will still have that 5-year restriction, but mostly it's 1 year at this point. There are a few other provisions, like how long you've been in practice. Have you reached a mature level of practice? Are you more than 5 years in practice, but not necessarily with the same carrier? Also, some carriers have provisions around how old you are. So are you 50 or 55, 60? One other thing is just to bear in mind that you have to permanently retire from the practice of medicine.
Oh, you couldn't even work part-time.
Right.
Okay.
So that when you retire and you get that free retirement tail, the requirement is that you fully retire from the practice of medicine. And some carriers even have you sign off on a statement that says that's your
Okay. That's
what your
interesting.
plan is.
Because a lot of, practitioners kind of retire for a couple of years and then decide to pick up some telework. So that would be off the table if that's kind of what you chose.
The intent is that you're fully retiring from the
Okay.
practice of medicine, yeah. And sometimes, we will have carriers or doctors that do want to come back and go back to work. And we look at different options in that scenario, and we can have different conversations about, is it going to be worth it to do that?
Right.
Is the cost of it worth it? And then, can we secure coverage that would meet the need? But that's usually a by situation conversation.
So if one of your clients was considering retirement, like today, but they wouldn't be retiring for 5 years, for example, or 6 years or whatever, when should they come to you or their carrier to kind of talk about retirement and what that looks like?
Well, I think we can have that conversation whenever it's good for the provider.
Okay.
But I would say, give yourself a good window, a good runway. And as I think we mentioned earlier, make sure you're comfortable with the retirement provisions of your policy. We're happy to go over those with our clients, of course, or folks that just want to have that conversation and take a look at that coverage and exposure analysis. We do that quite often.
Okay. Yeah. So just come, as soon as you're even thinking about it, just come to you guys and
Happy
kind
to
of
talk.
start that
Sure.
conversation.
Sure.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Ask MSVIA. For more resources or to speak with our team, visit msvia.org. See you next time.